Here's what's coming up on today's show.
The second half of the game is when the IRS starts to play the game, and you could be winning 100-0, but that second half now the IRS gets to dictate what the new rules of the game are, and they can make them whatever they want them to be.
Yep.
And so no matter what you did in that first half, there's no way you're going to win the second half unless you put that strategy in place beforehand to get them out of your life.
This is the Retire Happy podcast with John Amarino, a fiduciary financial advisor at Securus Financial in the San Diego area, and Thomas O'Connell, president of International Financial Advisory Group, Inc. in Parsippany, New Jersey. Together, they'll be keeping retirement happy from coast to coast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Retire Happy podcast. I'm your host on the West Coast, John Amarino, and I am joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague and great friend on the East Coast, Tommy O'Connell. Tom, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, John. Had a nice, quiet Memorial Day weekend. So I'm relaxed. I'm ready to get back to work. Excited about today's topic. So how was your weekend?
Good. And you know, Memorial Day, a lot of baseball this weekend. And obviously, Memorial Day is a big day for our family, having two friends unfortunately killed in the line of duty, and having another couple colleagues killed in the line of duty, and then also having a friend killed in action in Afghanistan. So always definitely a day that hits home for us. Very grateful, and thank you to all the all the survivors of people who have lost loved ones. Your sacrifice goes well beyond words.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
With that, we it was America's pastime for us. Jake had travel ball. You being a Yankees fan, we did go to the Padres-Yankees game, and we were able to get some field passes for batting practice. So the boys were on the field and got to see the boys in action. You guys took 2 of 3, so congratulations.
All right.
So
enough said about that.
Yeah. So, well, folks, on today's episode, normally we have people that we're discussing and interviewing, but every so now and then, Tommy and I like to just have a discussion. And, we were talking with our director of communications, Erin, and she's like, let's talk about some topics that are near and dear to your heart, and also, what in our practices have we heard that people say they wish they would have done this sooner? So, Tommy, I'm going to start with you. Obviously, you're the senior advisor here. I'm not making fun of your age.
I thought you were going to say senior citizen.
You're close, but you're the senior advisor here. I mean, all joking aside, you're one of my original mentors. So, in your practice, what are probably one or two of the biggest things that you've heard people say, I wish I would have known that, or I wish I did that sooner?
Yeah, I think one of the ones that we as advisors hear the most is, I wish I had started planning sooner. Right? So that's a big deal. If I could go back and tell my younger self something, right? I'd save earlier, I'd save more, I'd do this a little bit different or that a little bit different in that regard. So that's one of the ones that I hear a lot. Another one, which I think that we have a lot to talk about, is about taxes. I wish I had done better tax planning, or I wish I had structured my portfolio or my investments or my strategies in a more tax efficient manner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And one of those things is proactive planning, which is something that you and I try to do to the best of our ability with our clients, and I think we're pretty good at it. But we've said this before, and I'm sure it'll be said again. Most people's CPAs or tax accountants, they're not really future looking or forward looking. They're more of the looking back and saying, okay, hey, this is what happened, so this is the consequence of that. Whereas we're very proactive. One of both of our specialties is really trying to do efficient tax planning with people, because we're big believers in tax-free money being the best kind of money.
Absolutely. And Tommy, you're an Ed Slott Master Elite Advisor. I'm part of the advisor Preferred Advisors Financial Network, and both of us have connections to very well respected CPAs. You, of
Right.
course, Ed Slott, and on my end, Bob Keebler. And we talk a lot between what we learn at our advanced planning conferences. And Ed Slott, I've been to many of his conferences too. He always talks about CPAs being historians. I think that's
Right.
probably, would you say that's probably one of his biggest taglines?
For sure. When it comes to proper planning, again, like I said, most of them just look backwards. Very few times do we come across people that say, well, yeah, my accountant told me this is how I should do this going forward, right? It's always, hey, this is what happened. Now, again, I'm being overly general, I think, but I'll say most often that's what we hear, even though, on the other hand, what we always hear when we make recommendations to people is, well, let me ask my accountant about it. Right? The accountant is one of the most trusted advisors that people have, yet it's one of the last people who do proactive planning for people.
Yeah. And this isn't, hey,
It's not a knock.
Yeah, it's not a knock on a CPA or enrolled agent.
Right.
They are absolutely necessary. Tommy and I, we are good friends with Mauro D'Amico, an enrolled agent and fellow financial advisor. I would not want his practice. He has a very successful practice, but he's a tax preparer first and financial advisory. Tons of work. I mean, the centers of influence in the tax world is, their life is miserable for almost now the majority of the year. It used to just be up until April. Now it's, being extended out to October. And the reason why I bring up Ed Slott and Bob Keebler is, Ed Slott, he talks a lot about them being historians. Bob Keebler says that, again, their position is more book related. But here's the bigger issue that he says, especially in the CPA arena, is that today's CPA is shying away from individual work, because with all the new laws and whatnot, it's really handcuffing their practice. So they're going to go for the bigger fish, the bigger companies. And so you're not, you're going and you're trying to seek advice or proactive advice from someone that may have 600 to 2,000 clients. So it really is just about, hey, let's make sure we're getting your taxes in line. We have what you owe the IRS or what you might get back, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Perhaps, hey, am I withholding? Am I doing quarterly taxes? They're letting you know that. But that's where it does come to. So I hear that same thing in my office too. I wish I did a lot more tax planning, especially with those clients that are 72, 73 years old, because now the RMDs are a reality.
Right.
And one of my favorite clients, a couple, the wife is one of the sweetest people I ever meet. The only time I ever heard her kind of get, what I would qualify as maybe upset, because she just doesn't have that personality, is when I told her she had to take out a several $1,000 RMD. And she's like, we did all this Roth conversion planning. I said, and you made the right choice, because if you didn't do all that Roth conversion planning over the last 7 years, your bill would be considerably larger.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was then that, okay, good, right? We did that. But I definitely hear a lot of the tax planning too. And I'd probably say on my end, the other thing I hear is, and this is a behavioral finance thing, I wish I never sold that stock, right? I wish I never sold, nowadays I guess it'd be NVIDIA. And, people, again, I think for a lot of people in the accumulation phase when they go into retirement, I think that's probably one of the hardest transitions they have making, is going from that accumulation mindset into a preservation and efficient market strategy plan.
Distribution, yeah.
Yeah. And just understanding that, listen, that's what the accumulation, and I gave you a shout out on my video that's going to be coming out next week about, you're a very accomplished, I guess it would be mountaineer, right?
Okay.
I mean, is that like what?
Yeah,
you're not a hiker. You hit the summit of Kilimanjaro. What is it?
We'll call it a mountaineer for now.
Okay. Well, what's the proper term?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know
what to call yourself when you're hiking the mountain. Are you just a hiker?
Yeah. I mean, I've never looked at it. Honestly, I've never looked at it much differently than that. I mean, I like climbing mountains, but I'm not a pro at it by any stretch of the imagination. And I never summited, although I did try to go up it, I never summited Mount Everest.
You got to base camp, right?
Yeah, we got a little bit beyond base camp.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, most people die when they get to Everest, right? So you give yourself a little bit credit here, Tommy. Listen, my wife, she does a lot of hiking around San Diego County. She's a hiker. I'm not going to put her, and she's, everyone she takes, they're like ready to die when they get back down to the bottom because she just flew up the mountain. But
right.
I'm not putting her in the same realm of going I'm not going to say she's going to go to Kilimanjaro next week. Mm-hmm. So, anyways, I digress.
All right.
So, the accumulation phase, I mentioned you in the video talking about, the accumulation phase and going up the mountain. You need discipline, hard work, going without, right? You have to save. And you mentioned it. A lot of people say, God, I wish I would have saved more instead of, buying toys or whatnot.
Right.
But then you get to that summit, and now you're towards the top, and the summit, that's your preservation. But the downhill is the most dangerous, right, Tommy?
Yep. That's where most people die.
Right? So,
yep.
And again, you have all these nuances in retirement that people just aren't aware of, right? People don't understand the tax torpedoes of Social Security, Medicare, required minimum distributions, and they don't understand how interest rates could positively or negatively affect you in retirement to a much greater degree than in your working years. Because in your working years, yes, interest rates could hurt you, right, if you're buying a house nowadays, but you're mostly focused on, hey, money coming in from our jobs, money coming out for our expenses. Hopefully, if you're smart, you should be, in the positive. But retirement's a completely different game because you have all these nuances, and so we talk about that a lot.
Yeah, and remember, during your working years, you probably have a lot more write-offs as well, right? You're putting money into your 401k, have your kids, they're living at home, but they're a tax deduction, unlike after they're done with college and they come and live at home and just eat Skittles and play video games. They're no longer tax deductions to you. Most people will have a mortgage pre-retirement, so they have some type of write-off on that end. So you have less opportunity to take advantage of tax breaks, I think, in retirement, post-working years. And most people don't understand that. what you're kind of left with once you retire are just your standard deductions for the most part. And then everything else is going to be taxable right away.
And I think too, with that, and I've talked a lot about it on my videos, and we've talked about it on this podcast, is people have to understand that, you're used to your tax rates being based on your salary, right? But in retirement, unless you have a pension, your expenses dictate your withdrawals, which in turn dictate your taxes. So it's almost a little bit, for a lot of people, it's a little bit of a role reversal. Your income is no longer dictating your taxes. It's really your expenses and what you're withdrawing, which determines your tax rates. So I think this is a good segue, because obviously in the amount of time we've talked about it, taxes have always been one of the biggest reasons why people come to see me. And it's always been, I wish I put more money away in a Roth IRA. And I wish, again, going back to your planning, that I wish I even just saved money, instead of putting money in the bank account for all those years, maybe open up a brokerage account or whatnot. With that, I want to kind of focus in, Tommy, on taxes, because this is a great time to talk about looking into the future and avoiding that, God, I wish I did this. Because, folks, we are about 18 months away, 1.5 years away from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expiring. Now, what does that mean? Right? Well, tax rates go back to 2017. Oh, okay. Well, what does that mean? Taxes go up. Maybe 4%, right, Tommy?
Well, if you think about it, let's say you're going to go from a 22 to a 25. That's 3% more. So that's actually roughly a 10% increase in what you owe in taxes. It's not just 3%, it's 10% more than what you're paying.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like it's a small amount.
And the other thing too that people don't realize is, when I talk about tax rates, you have your taxes. Okay, so taxes are going to go up, right? That's your, the 37% tax bracket. But the other thing you have to hear for is what I call the marketing term of tax increases, and that's we're lowering the tax brackets. So if we look at it right now, in 2025, the 37% tax bracket for a married filing joint couple is going to be over $700,000. So to get in that bracket, you're making over $700,000. Now, the tax rate in 2026 is going to only go up to 39.6. This is for the high earners. But the bracket is going to drop down to $600,000. So that means you're going to be hitting that bracket at 39.6 at $600,000. So people need to be aware of this. And yes, we talked about, the high income earners. Well, what does it mean to the middle bracket? Right now, if you're in the 24% bracket in 2025, that's just under $200,000 to get that 24% bracket. In 2026, you're going to be at the 25% bracket at about $100,000.
And just remember, what you're talking about right now is the married filing jointly.
Yes.
When we're dealing with the age bracket of people that we're dealing with, a lot of times there are people that go from a married filing jointly to a single the following year. And those numbers are going to be substantially lower than when you're married filing jointly. And so what will oftentimes happen without good planning is that surviving spouse ends up going into a higher tax bracket than when they were married.
Yeah. Absolutely.
When both
The widow
spouses were
tax.
alive. Yep.
Yeah, much higher.
Right. Now I'm gonna jump off just a little bit here. Right.
Okay.
I mean, I'm still on topic, but just kind of as a sidebar or a side note, one of the things that we're also going to have to be aware of is the reduction of deductions, credits, exemptions, things like that.
Right.
Let's remember that right now, as we're sitting here speaking, the country is roughly $36 trillion in debt. We our interest owed on the debt has exceeded what the government spends in education and defense for the first time ever. Okay. We also have $300 trillion of unfunded liabilities. Things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, military pensions, health care, government pensions, government health care. None of that stuff has been paid for yet we owe it. So one of the tricks that they do is they either reduce or get rid of deductions, credits, and things like that. Back I can remember back in I guess the 70s, maybe early 80s, you could actually write off the interest on your credit cards.
Wow.
That's an expense now that obviously you can't have. There was a deduction that people had for their property taxes, which got cut because of the tax cut back in 2017.
Yeah, the
right?
SALT.
The SALT, right. So you're going to see more and more of that. There's going to be another tax that people are not prepared for, which is one of the ways that they're going to keep Social Security solvent. And it's all math. It's nothing more than simple mathematics. Is that they're going to uncap, I believe, they're going to uncap your salary for the Social Security tax. In other words, right now it's capped at like $140,000 or some number like that. And what they're going to do is they're going to take that cap off, and you're going to have to pay Social Security on everything. That's my prediction in the coming years, because right now they're saying they're going to run out of money by 36, where
31 actually.
31 is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Where they're only going to be able to cover 75% of what they owe you in your Social Security paycheck.
Yeah. And the other things too are when we go back and we look that so many people, especially the higher income earners, 2017 was, we're by the time the sun sets, you're looking at 8 years for a lot of people in this world not paying alternative minimum tax. That's coming back, folks. And the alternative minimum tax never went away. It's just it went up to $1 million for a married couple. Well, now that's coming back down to about under $200,000. So when we are starting the topic of things I wish I would have done, Tommy, let's fast forward to 2026, and we don't want our listeners to be like, wow, I thought about it, but I wish I would have done this. I had 2 tax planning years, not a lot of time, but still some time to save some of the tax risk. But I didn't take advantage of it. And on one of my videos, I told Aaron that I kind of do an inversion of risk when it comes to taxes, right? From a behavioral finance point, Tommy, when it comes to investments, what is the point of maximum financial risk? It's when the markets are at all-time highs, right? And we know that sparks euphoria. You actually have the greatest, it's the worst time to jump in, right?
Right.
Everyone likes to talk about Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett never said buy high and sell low. I like to turn it when we talk to taxes that when you look at us and being in historically one of the lowest tax rates in history.
Yep.
I like to look at that as being at the point of maximum financial risk when it comes to taxes, because in theory, could taxes go lower? I guess. But the question is how much lower? So if we're really looking at risk, Tommy, how much lower? And just kind of just spitballing in all your years, how much lower do you take out common sense too, right? Take out common sense of because we know DC's not using it. If they were trying to just pander for another round of votes, how much lower do you think really taxes could go? A couple percentage points?
Yeah.
Okay.
At the end of the day, every dollar that it goes down, it's meaningful to people, and I get that. But it's not substantial.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not going to make you a millionaire.
No.
Right. Now, on the flip side, getting back to the risk, if we're at some of the lowest tax rates in history, could and really, we've heard the former Comptroller General Walker talk about this. In 2010, that tax rates needed to double to solve the then $10 trillion debt.
Right.
So looking at our government spending, looking at everything that's kind of happened from a national standpoint, right? We had, a couple million illegal immigrants that we're going to have to fund come into this country. How much higher could taxes go?
Throughout the 70s, the highest tax bracket was 70%. You go back to World War II, and the highest tax bracket was, 94%, I think it was. Right? So they can go a lot higher.
Right.
Now, back then, again, you had a lot more tax deductions and credits and exemptions, things like that. However, and back in World War II, that 90% tax bracket was for people who were earning $200,000 or more, which was the 0.1 percenters of today, probably. So not a lot of people are going to get trapped into that. But, however, it's going to go across the board because you can only soak so much money out of people. I forget what the stat is. I think it was, if you took everything that every billionaire in the United States had, and you took possession of that, as in the government taking possession of that, that wouldn't even pay for 1 year's worth of debt that we have. So where's the rest of that money coming from?
Exactly.
It's coming from you and I. And who are the currently most undertaxed people? People that are putting money pre-tax into these government-sponsored retirement plans. Because all you're doing is postponing that tax into the future. And if you think of it like Ed Slott used the example or analogy of it being a football game, right? The first half of the game, you're going in there under one set of rules where you're saving, investing, growing, right? And then the second half of the game is when the IRS starts to play the game, and you could be winning 100-0, but that second half now the IRS gets to dictate what the new rules of the game are, and they can make them whatever they want them to be.
Yep.
And so no matter what you did in that first half, there's no way you're going to win the second half unless you put that strategy in place beforehand to get them out of your life. And the only ways to get them out of your life is not to owe taxes. The only way not to owe taxes, as far as I know, are Roth and cash value life insurance. If somebody else wants to come to me with something else, I'm all ears. But those are the only two things that are going to provide you tax-free income in the future.
Right. You have an HSA, but that's medical, but still important.
Right. Right.
Maybe.
So I look at those as, it's an ancillary thing, but because that's not what people are living off of.
Right. Exactly.
But you're absolutely right.
I think we beat that up pretty good. I think, and here's the other thing, folks. We talked about tax rates going up. We talked about tax brackets going down. The other very important thing that I want you to understand, because kind of looking back throughout history, I love reading and watching history stuff. You kind of you got to understand that the government really, has pulled the wool over the people's eyes for a very, very long time. And they've always kind of like, put the proverbial lipstick on a pig. And here is another one that we need to understand, that they could come out and say, you know what, we're not going to raise taxes. We're going to keep taxes just like they are. But what they're going to actually do is increase the amount of tax brackets. And this was, back in the 80s. And I often show a lot of people that come into my office to understand the tax code, is that if you look at, currently having 7 tax brackets, if we went back to something like in the 80s when we had like 21 brackets, that your tax rate would effectively be almost doubled, because, instead of going from a 0 to 10% tax bracket, within that 10% tax bracket, you might start at 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. If you add up all those percentages, by the time you get to the top of the 10% bracket, you paid almost double, right? And for a lot of people, when the government's calculating your taxes, I always give the example of the measuring cup, right? The first 10%, $20,000 for a married filing jointly, that's $2,000, 10% of 20 grand. And then you move into the 12% bracket. And they just, it's kind of like keeping a little side chart. All right, well, for this next taxable income in the 12%, that's $8,000. Okay, well, you owe $10,000, which is, your total tax is essentially your average or effective tax rate. So understand that. So we talked about what we wish we would have done. We know the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is going to sunset. And I always looked at it from a political standpoint. For a lot of Washington, we know they're anti-Trump, and this was Trump's legacy. They're going to want to let it die. Bob Keebler actually put it better. He said, listen, it has to be a lot of different things. That it's just not them saying, let's continue the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It's automatically expiring unless new legislation is brought into it. Right. So there is an absolutely great chance that this is expiring. So we beat it up on what could potentially happen and the risks of higher taxes. So Tommy, let's just finish this last 10, 15 minutes of what can our listeners do to avoid saying, I wish I would have done that. Let's be proactive in the next 18 months. You take the first suggestion for our listeners for taxes.
Yeah, so one of the things, for some people, it might be too late to do a lot of great planning for themselves. And so what I look at for some people, for clients that I'm working with now, is the next generations, right? Because most people that are in retirement, coming into retirement, other than their home, their biggest assets are qualified assets, dollars that they've never paid tax on. And they don't have a lot of money in already taxed money that they can pay the tax for the Roth conversion. Now, if you do, right, that's always one of our biggest suggestions, right, John?
Right.
But with the tax cuts, they also changed with the Secure Act, the stretch IRA. So your non-spouse beneficiaries, for most people, we'll put it for non-spouse beneficiaries, they're only going to have 10 years to take out what they inherit in those qualified assets from their parents, from their brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, grandma, grandpa, whatever. And so, again, this was another way for the government to force out distributions so that they can get their hands on of trillions. I think the number is like $18 trillion that's in qualified accounts right now. And so this is their way of getting it. And so for most people, let's say I've run into a bunch of these cases recently where I have people that have $3, $4, $5 million in IRAs and 401ks and those types of plans. And they don't have the cash or other assets to do substantial Roth conversions, but they have, say, 2 children. Well, in effect, what you're doing is you're making the federal government your biggest beneficiary, because that money's going to have to come out in 10 years. So in an example, what if your child is taking out $500,000 a year? That's basically going to put them in a 50% tax bracket between federal, state, possibly city tax, right? Your IRMA tax,
Net investment.
your Obamacare tax, right? So now on a good day, they're only paying 50% tax. So you got two kids, so that money's split. So each of them get $250,000. You've just made your government your biggest beneficiary. So what can you do? Well, that's tax planning, right? So maybe start taking some of those distributions, and yes, they're going to be taxable, but let's create tax-free money for the next generations. While we're in lower tax environment. For me, that's a big issue in having conversations with clients these days, because I just think it's not right that you work for 30 or 40 years and you save and you do everything that they tell you to do, and then at the end of the day they take it all away.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Roth being very powerful, because again, if you're able to get that money tax free, then they can actually allow that money to compound and grow for 10 years before they have to empty it.
Right.
But let's also think, and Tommy, you referred to it early. We're not, in this a lot of this example is thinking about, potentially your heirs, your kids or, grandkids, whoever you're leaving the money to. What about the spouse? Doesn't matter who, but the surviving spouse may need to tap Roth IRA money to control their tax rates. Because again, you mentioned it, right? You go from married filing to single filer, the tax code's definitely different, especially when it comes to Medicare. So, a lot of people see a big jump, and, that's a great discussion to have, making sure your money stays with the people you love, not the IRS. And, one other thing I'd like to add to that, Tommy, if it's okay, is be very open with, your advisor. If your advisor's not asking you, hey, is one of your children, do your children make disproportionate incomes, right? Is one child, has a good job, is making 75 or 100,000, versus the other child who just so happens to be a very successful doctor is making $500,000. That type of planning can still make, if you're just kind of going across the board going, I'm just going to leave, Susie and Jimmy 50-50 across the board. You still may be making the IRS the biggest beneficiary, especially when it comes to whoever's inheriting, the doctor inheriting that money. Because as you said, let's say, they have to take out $100,000 or $200,000 a year. Well, now you just turn that child's income from $500,000 to $700,000. So, perhaps even another layer of that is going, well, child A makes $75,000. Let's leave a little bit more IRA money to them, and let's leave a little bit more of the house equity to the higher earner. And in doing so, you're actually being more equitably fair to your children, but you're also keeping your kids as more beneficiaries than the IRS.
Right. Yeah. So there's many different ways of skinning the cat, so to speak.
Right.
But you have to sit down with someone who can lay out the different scenarios for you, right? Listen, not everybody is charitably inclined, but a charitable trust might be a great answer to preserve more assets for your family, even though you are giving up something to a charity.
Right.
But what's the most important thing there? It's your family getting to keep more money in their pocket.
Right.
And if you can create that scenario using something that's maybe a little bit out of the box thinking, or not something that maybe you would necessarily be plan A, well, okay, so it's not plan A, but if it leaves your family more money, isn't that the most important thing?
Exactly.
And I would rather see a charity get some of my money, honestly, than the federal government. Because they get enough of that.
Yeah, you just took the point that I make to a lot of clients out. Like, in some cases, the money's not going to come to your pocket. It's either going to go to the charity or the government. Now, we know the government does a lot.
Or the nursing home.
Yeah. The government does a lot of wasteful spending, right? There's studies, and I always use they're studying which lipstick, monkeys prefer, what color, whatever. There's literally the dumbest things out there that our government spends money on. Or there's something that you believe in, right? Wounded warriors, stop, human trafficking or cancer foundations. So you actually have the controls of making a difference to what's most important to you. And, that's kind of another segue where you talked about the charitable trust. Folks, if you're over 70 and a half right now and you have a standard deduction and you're just donating, whether it's tithing to church or donating to, whatever charity out of your bank account, you're missing out on an opportunity to have some tax relief within that charity. Right now, you're just making a charitable contribution with no positive tax no positive tax attributes to you. So if you're over 70 and a half, you should really consider doing the qualified charitable distribution, which is the first money from that account each year going into being directly sent to the charity or church of your choice. Very powerful.
I don't remember ever reading about the Special Olympics having to pay $1,000 for a light bulb. Right. So I think these organizations are going to spend your dollars more wisely, more efficiently, and for a better cause.
Right.
Than what our federal and state governments do.
Right. And if you're under 70 and a half and you're still not getting, you're still doing a standard deduction, I'll offer 2 more tips, Tommy. Number 1, if you have appreciated stock, you can gift that stock to them, especially if you have a lot of it, right? Yeah, I've had a lot of people who had employee stock purchase plans or pension plans where they're over-concentrated. That's a great way. You can gift that stock. And, it's a good way to reduce your overexposure and get that cost basis off. But there's another thing. Start looking at, we're getting down to the wire, but start looking at giving in 2-year bunches. So, right. So this year, you may give 2024 and 2025. You may give all your tithings or charitable contributions for this year and next year, wrapped up into 2024. And that could take you above into the itemized tax brackets, right, Tommy? So now you're getting something for those distributions.
Right.
And then next year, you just go and you explain to the charity or whatnot, if you say, hey, listen, I usually do this every year. This year, I'm going to double up for next year. Next year, you claim the standard deduction. And then in 2026, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires. And, if we go back, just revert back to the 2017, itemized deductions will be a little bit more prevalent. And so this way, you at least squeezed a little bit of juice out the lemon. But, the biggest thing is we gave you a couple of things to think about. Start being proactive.
I'm going to throw out a couple other ones real quick.
Go ahead.
I know we only got a couple of minutes. We've talked about this in 2 prior programs, the NUA, which, right, you just talked about having stock in your qualified plans and things like that. So go back and listen to I'm not going to rehash that, but the NUA is a great tax saver. And then also something that we'll have to talk about in another day is a QLAC, right? So listen, there is part of your qualified assets that you can set aside, and you don't have to touch them for any number of years in a QLAC. And maybe you save that income from those starting, say, when you're 85 years old. I think that's the latest you can do it, right? So, if you're 65, you can take $200,000 and put it in this qualified life annuity, and it won't count towards your required minimum distributions. But at some point in the future, you have to start taking the income from that. Basically, you're turning it into a pension. But you can postpone that all the way to age 85. And so now what you can do is you can guarantee yourself income even at that late stage of life.
What we want to close with, folks, is just understand that a penny saved is a penny earned. And we don't know what the future holds, but you do have some control over your current tax destiny, which can help your future tax rates. Going back to what we talked about, folks, could taxes go lower? I would say the chances are slim, but the better question is, if they did go lower, how much? And I think you would agree with Tommy and I that it'd be a minimal percentage amount. It'd be nice, but nothing earth-shattering. Now forward that, hey, we're raising taxes 10 to 15%. That's a hit, especially for someone on a fixed income in retirement. So
I would say a penny saved is a penny earned, but it could be even better than that if you save it the right way.
Yeah.
Because now you can get compounding interest.
Yep. Yeah. And again, it's, tax-free compounding money is the most powerful money out there, folks. So,
right.
The point is, going back to how we started this, things I wish I would have done. Folks, we encourage you really to take the time and get help with this, because we're not telling you, hey, go ahead and just convert all your $1 million IRA right now. You have to understand that, especially when you're 63 and above, that conversions have implications on your Social Security, on your tax rates, and on your Medicare IRMAs. So Tommy and I are well versed and well experienced in this, and we have the resources and the software to understand that we can only take you up to this far before we start affecting certain areas. So, there's multiple levels that you have to be aware of when you're doing Roth conversions. And you have to understand what your tax bill is going to be and if you can pay it. Right. So, folks, Tommy and I just want to sit down, talk to you guys about what we're passionate about. And, we hope you guys have enjoyed this. But more importantly, we hope that you take the limited time left and you do something about it. And
18 months goes by fast.
Yes. Try to take control of your tax destiny. So, folks, that's it for today's episode of the Retire Happy Podcast. Tommy, man, usually we have a third person here talking, but when it comes to taxes, we've gone through that 50 minutes like it was a steak knife and butter.
We could go another 15 minutes easy. So,
right.
Yeah.
So thanks again, folks, for tuning in to the Retire Happy Podcast. We sure hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time. Take care.
It's easy to get in touch with John and Thomas. If you're more on the West Coast, give John a call at 858-935-6210. That's 858-935-6210, or go online to GoSecurus.com. That's GoSecurus.com. If you're more of an East Coaster, then call Thomas, 973-394-0623. That's 973-394-0623, and online at internationalfinancial.com. That's internationalfinancial.com. And you can, of course, always just check the description or the show notes section of today's show for all that contact information. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcasting apps, and we'll see you next time on the Retire Happy Podcast.
Investment advisory services offered through Brookstone Capital Management, LLC BCM, a registered investment advisor. BCM, Securus Financial, and International Financial Advisory Group are independent of each other. Insurance products and services are not offered through BCM, but are offered and sold through individually licensed and appointed agents. The opinions expressed by John Iamarino, Thomas O'Connell, and guests on this show are their own and are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Past performance cannot be used as an indicator to determine future results. Any strategies mentioned may not be suitable for everyone. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. Before acting on any information mentioned, please consult with a qualified tax or investment advisor to determine if it is suitable for your specific situation. This program is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information with regard to the subjects covered. Registered investment advisors and investment advisor representatives act as fiduciaries for all of our investment management clients. We have an obligation to act in the best interests of our clients and to make full disclosure of any conflicts of interest, if any exist. Please refer to our firm brochure, the ADV 2A Item 4, for additional information.